When we think about extinction, most of us picture familiar giants like dinosaurs or woolly mammoths, but the fossil record holds creatures so strange that scientists still argue about what they actually were. These aren't your typical textbook fossils. These are the evolutionary mysteries that make paleontologists lose sleep at night. And some of them are so bizarre that when first discovered, researchers thought they were looking at elaborate hoaxes or alien artifacts. Let's start with one of the most perplexing discoveries ever made in Australian rocks. Meet Spriggina, a creature that looks like someone crossed the centipede with a feather duster and then ran it through a photocopier that was running dangerously low on toner. This half-billion-year-old enigma was first unearthed in the 1940s in the remote Ediacaran hills of South Australia. At first glance, you might think it's some kind of early arthropod ancestor waiting to be classified. It has what appears to be a segmented body with a distinctive horseshoe-shaped head that could have belonged on an ancient alien spaceship. But here's where things get weird, and I mean really weird. Unlike any arthropod we know, living or dead, Spriggina seems to completely lack legs, eyes, antennae, or even a discernible mouth. So how did it move around the ancient seafloor? How did it find food? And more importantly, how did it actually eat anything?
Scientists have been scratching their heads for decades, coming up with increasingly wild theories. Some think it might have glided along the seafloor like a living hovercraft, using some unknown propulsion system. Others suggest it absorbed nutrients directly through its skin, like a bizarre organic sponge. But the most unsettling theory is that it might not have been an animal at all, in any sense we understand. Some researchers propose it could have been a giant microbe colony or even a completely unknown form of life. The fact that we're still debating whether this thing was even technically alive tells you everything about how genuinely strange it really was. And this is just the beginning of our journey into paleontological madness. Now, if you think that's confusing, buckle up, because you're about to hear about Wiwaxia. This creature looks like what would happen if a medieval knight's armour had a passionate love affair with the world's largest hairbrush. Discovered in the famous Burgess Shale of British Columbia, Wiwaxia was covered head to toe in scales and spines that would make even the most aggressive porcupine deeply jealous. But here's the kicker that's kept scientists arguing for over a century. Absolutely nobody knows what the hell it actually is. When it was first found back in the early 1900s, scientists confidently thought it might be some kind of primitive mollusk because of those distinctive scale-like structures covering its body. Then someone with better eyes noticed it had anatomical features suspiciously similar to segmented annelid worms. But wait, there's so much more confusion coming.
Other researchers jumped in and argued it could actually be related to early arthropods based on certain structural details. And just to make things even more beautifully confusing, some experts think it might be somehow connected to brachiopods of all things. That's like finding a mysterious fossil and having the world's top experts say it could be a bird, a fish, a reptile, or a completely new type of animal that breaks all known rules. The scales themselves represent a mystery wrapped inside another mystery and tied with a bow of confusion. They're arranged in neat rows like carefully placed roof tiles, but they also somehow had the remarkable ability to be raised or lowered at will. Was this elaborate system for defense against predators? Some kind of primitive communication method? Temperature regulation in ancient seas? Honestly, your guess is probably as educated as any paleontologists at this point. But perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of Wiwaxia's anatomy is its bizarre feeding apparatus that defies all logic. It had what researchers diplomatically call a radula-like structure, which is basically a tongue absolutely covered in hundreds of tiny sharp teeth. But this nightmarish tongue was located on the underside of its body, nowhere near where you'd expect a mouth to be. It's anatomically absurd, yet somehow it worked for millions of years. Speaking of creatures that seem to defy every known law of biology, let me introduce you to the absolutely incredible Opabinia. This five-eyed wonder looks like it was designed by a committee of intoxicated aliens who had never actually seen Earth life before and were working from very bad descriptions.
Picture a vacuum cleaner hose with fins attached, topped off with 5 mushroom-shaped eyes arranged like a crown, and you're getting close to this monstrosity. But the real showstopper, the piece de resistance, is its utterly ridiculous proboscis, a long, flexible tube that ends in a grasping claw. This bizarre appendage could apparently reach out, grab unsuspecting prey, and stuff the victims into a mouth located underneath its head. It's essentially like having a fully functional arm growing directly out of your nose, complete with fingers. When Opabinia was first reconstructed and presented to the scientific community, the researcher presenting it was met with genuine laughter from his colleagues, not because it was particularly funny, but because it was so utterly ridiculous that people assumed he had to be making some kind of elaborate joke. The creature seemed to violate every single rule of sensible animal design that scientists thought they understood. 5 eyes arranged like some kind of organic crown, a grasping proboscis that belonged in science fiction, fins that looked more like misshapen pancake than anything remotely functional for swimming. It took several years for the scientific community to grudgingly accept that nature had actually somehow produced something this fundamentally bizarre. And even now, decades later, we're still not entirely sure what the hell Opabinia actually was supposed to be. Some researchers think it might be distantly related to arthropods, based on certain shared features. Others argue for connections to mollusks, pointing to that weird proboscis. A few particularly brave souls have suggested it represents an entirely extinct evolutionary group with absolutely no living relatives anywhere on Earth.
In other words, it might be an evolutionary dead end so complete and thorough that nothing remotely like it exists today. A unique experiment in biological design that failed spectacularly and left no descendants behind. Now let's travel back even further in time, deeper into the mists of prehistory, to meet the utterly perplexing Kimberella. This creature has been systematically driving paleontologists completely insane since it was first discovered way back in the 1940s. At first, scientists looked at the flattened fossils and thought they were obviously looking at some kind of primitive jellyfish. The preserved remains showed what appeared to be a simple dome-shaped body with radiating structures extending outward. Pretty standard jellyfish anatomy, right? Seemed like an open and shut case. Wrong, so very wrong. As more and more specimens were painstakingly uncovered and studied, it became crystal clear that Kimberella was absolutely nothing like any jellyfish that had ever existed. For starters, it displayed clear bilateral symmetry, meaning its left and right sides were perfect mirror images of each other. Jellyfish, both ancient and modern, have radial symmetry that spreads out from a central point, like the spokes of a wheel. Then researchers began noticing what appeared to be genuine feeding tracks preserved in the rock right alongside the Kimberella fossils. These tracks suggested that this creature could move in a purposeful, directed way and actively search for food sources. Jellyfish, by contrast, are essentially prisoners of ocean currents that simply grab whatever unfortunate prey happens to float within reach of their tentacles.
But here's where this mystery gets really, truly interesting and mind-bending. Some scientists now think Kimberella might have been one of the very first animals in Earth history to evolve a true, complete digestive system. In other words, it could have possessed both a functional mouth for taking in food and a separate anus for expelling waste. That might not sound particularly revolutionary to modern ears, but having a through gut represents an absolutely huge evolutionary innovation. It's the fundamental difference between being a simple living garbage disposal and being a sophisticated biological processing plant. However, other researchers aren't convinced by this interpretation at all. They argued that what we're confidently interpreting as purposeful feeding tracks could be something else entirely, maybe even completely unrelated to biology. Maybe these supposed tracks aren't even connected to Kimberella specimens at all, but are just random geological formations. And without any preserved soft tissue to examine, we simply can't be absolutely certain about that hypothetical digestive system. So we're left with a creature that might have been a pioneering innovator in animal evolution, or might just be another weird blob that happened to leave some mysterious scratches in ancient mud. The uncertainty is absolutely maddening for researchers who crave definitive answers. But sometimes the most frustrating fossils are the ones that look almost familiar, like something you should recognize. Take Laggania, for example, a case study in paleontological confusion. When first discovered, scientists were absolutely convinced they had found clear evidence of two completely different animals. There was what appeared to be a jelly-like creature with strange arm-like appendages extending from its body.
And separately, scattered around the same rock formations, there were these weird curved spines that nobody could identify or classify. The spines didn't seem to belong to any known animal group. It took literally decades of painstaking research to realize that these weren't two separate creatures at all. They were actually different parts of a single incredibly bizarre animal that had been fossilized separately. Laggania turned out to be a highly active swimming predator with a circular mouth surrounded by flexible, grasping arms. Think of it as an unholy cross between a squid and a Venus flytrap with the hunting instincts of a shark. The supposed jellyfish was actually its main body viewed from directly above. And those mysterious, unidentifiable spines? They were the feeding appendages, fossilized separately when the animal decomposed. But even with this complete picture finally assembled, Laggania remains a genuine puzzle that keeps scientists guessing. How exactly did those flexible arms function during hunting? Did they grab prey directly like octopus tentacles, or did they sweep potential meals toward the mouth like a living net? And what about that bizarre circular mouth structure? It appears to be surrounded by hard plates that could close together like a camera aperture. Was this mechanism designed for crushing hard-shell prey or for filtering tiny organisms from the water column? The more we learn about these ancient creatures, the more new questions arise to torment researchers.
And that brings us to perhaps the most controversial and downright terrifying fossil discovery of all time. Meet Labyrinthodont, a creature that wasn't just strange, it was an absolutely monstrous amphibious predator that dominated ancient swamps with bone-crushing ferocity. We're talking about nightmarish beasts that could reach lengths of over 15 feet, with skulls alone measuring nearly 5 feet across. For context, this was during a time period when these monsters were the undisputed apex predators of their watery domains. Imagine stumbling across something with the body plan of a massive crocodile, but the hunting instincts of a great white shark lurking in prehistoric marshlands. When Labyrinthodont was first discovered, scientists naturally assumed they were looking at some kind of primitive crocodile ancestor. What else could possibly have such an enormous skull packed with razor-sharp teeth? Seemed logical enough at first glance. But there was a massive, glaring problem with this interpretation. The internal structure of those teeth was absolutely nothing like any reptile that had ever existed. So maybe it was some kind of early predator that we hadn't seen before. Nope, that didn't work either. Detailed analysis revealed something far more disturbing and confusing than anyone had imagined. Then someone realized the true horror of what they were dealing with. These weren't reptiles at all. They were amphibians that had somehow evolved into killing machines. Essentially, a supersized salamander with the predatory capabilities of a T-Rex and jaws designed for crushing bones. But even that description doesn't capture the full nightmare of its anatomy. The latest research reveals details that are even more mind-bending than anything that came before. Those massive teeth weren't just sharp, they had internal labyrinths of folded enamel that gave the creature its name. Basically a living bear trap with teeth so complex that scientists still can't figure out exactly how they worked. But how on earth did amphibians manage to evolve into such perfect killing machines? And why did evolution abandon this terrifying experiment so completely? These are exactly the kinds of questions that keep dedicated paleontologists awake at night staring at the ceiling. Because for every answer we manage to find, 3 completely new mysteries emerge to take its place. The fossil record is absolutely packed with these evolutionary experiments that went absolutely nowhere. Dead ends and failed prototypes that remind us how strange and wonderful life can be when it's trying new things. So the next time you see a familiar animal, remember that it represents just one small branch on an impossibly vast tree of life. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.